Hey there, everyone. All right, this is Kevin Finkle here. I am your host of Magic the Final Frontier podcast, and I'm just doing a little bit of an introduction here as we repost some of these old episodes of our podcast onto YouTube here. So we're talking about the very first episode that we made together, and, it was a great one. It was a lot more fun than I thought it was ever going to be, and just have some things to tell you about it. First of all, I want to share with a little fun story is that I wasn't originally supposed to be a host of the show. I had come onto the show as a writer, and as we were writing the show, we wrote it with one host in mind, and then kind of last minute, maybe like 2 days before the show, he had to back out, so we got a temporary host in. We're like, okay, he'll be temporary, we'll have our permanent host for the full time, and then maybe like an hour before we were going to record this first show, he had to drop out, so we're looking for someone. We kind of had a backup, and I'm just like, no, I'm going to go out and grab a microphone. No one else has looked at the script as much as I have. I've been working on this whole thing. So, ran out, got a microphone, an hour before the show, never done a podcast before, came onto the show and had a great time. So the guys wanted me back right away. So, big thank you to Kevin and Matt for wanting me on the show, to Thomas Snodgrass, who was the kind of person organizing it all, got me onto the show. Really appreciate it. That's what got me here, and I think that I've been having a good time with it. So, I hope you guys have been as well. So anyways, the first episode of our show, we really dug into some lists. This ended up being one of our longest episodes other than our set review spoilers. We were talking about quite a few lists, and what we talked about was maybe a fifth or a sixth of what we actually had written down. So for each one of these decks we ended up talking about for a few minutes, we had whole pages talking about what are the interesting things about this deck. So we really dug into it as writers. And then we realized that, no matter what I write for Matt, he's going to just hate on the list. And whatever I write for Sky, he's going to have some kind of insight that I never even would have picked up on. So we already had some things for that. And as we went on, we would write less and less. We'd kind of have an idea, we'd have a structure, and we would just talk and have a great time on the show. So we covered God of Frontier, which was a big Japanese tournament. We also covered the North America Champs, which was a big kind of calling card for us, is that we were the only ones with these lists. We were the ones really debuting the lists from that major event in Toronto. So, as far as what to think about if you're listening through this now, you haven't heard it before, there's been some changes in the meta. I think the biggest thing that's going to be different is the blue-black control deck that won. Blue-black control right now is very much still a deck, but it looks very different than it did at the time of this tournament. So a lot of the new cards such as Vraska's Contempt, Search for Azcanta, had a big impact on it. And then they also helped with the Saheeli matchup. So Saheeli kind of died down in the meta. That brought Atarka being a little bit less of the main deck to go to beat Saheeli. And then some of those decks like Abzan and even this blue-black deck that you're going to see, those kind of fell back, which were preying on the Atarka red deck. So, the whole meta shifted. It opened up quite a bit for a lot more decks to come out. But we do still see quite a few of the best kind of decks in the format now. You see an Abzan Vehicles. You see a Band Company deck. So quite a few things here that are going to look strong. Other than that, just feel free to listen to us talk. It was our first episode for a lot of us. Never had done a podcast before, so a little shaky here and there compared to some of our later episodes. But I think there was still a lot of great information given here, and we had a really good time with it. So I hope you guys do too, and look forward to more of these. I'm going to be giving just a little short introduction like this at the beginning so that you guys know what you're getting into. Thank you. This is Kevin Finkle. Hello everyone, this is Kevin Finkle. We're here with our first ever episode of Magic the Final Frontier. On this podcast we're going to be discussing Frontier, a format that plays cards from Magic 2015 forward, and with major high-prize tournaments happening frequently in Toronto, Tokyo, and regional events across the world. Our hope is that this podcast can bring all these groups of regional Frontier lovers together with an online source, keeping you up to date with what is new, powerful, and interesting in the wonderful Frontier format. Let me go through some quick introductions with the people here.
Hi everyone. This is Matt Murday. So I've played Magic since I was a kid, basically. Mostly casual, but around, I guess, this time last year, Frontier really kicked off at Face Games Toronto, which is where I play. And for the past year, it kind of has been the place for competitive Frontier. I love the idea of it. I don't really like the kind of playstyle of Modern, I guess you could say. I don't like the kind of unfair combo-oriented nature. And I don't really like that Standard rotates, so Frontier was just a natural fit for me. Before I forget, I want to do a quick shout out to Face to Face Games Toronto. They are hosting their final Frontier Showdown on September 10th, and we'd love to see anyone who's in Toronto show up for that.
This is Kevin Hanlon. I started playing Magic the Gathering in Khans of Tarkir, and I had a friend who introduced it to me as a draft format, and so my impression of Magic has always been a multicolor format, and I'm very much an enthusiast of 3 to 4 color Magic the Gathering. So when Khans of Tarkir rotated out in Shadows over Innistrad, I got severely disinterested in Standard, just because it didn't have many 3-color decks, and I find 2-color and 1-color Magic to be very limiting in terms of what I can accomplish. I think it makes a lot of decks very linear, even though there are colors that are naturally a little bit more versatile than others, especially green lately. But I started playing EDH as a response to Khans rotating out of Standard, and when I found out about Frontier, I was like, holy crap, I can play Savage Knuckleblades and Siege Rhinos and all this stuff again. This is going to be amazing, and I fell in love with it right away. So I'm a big fan of Limited. I'm a big fan of EDH, and for the last, I would say probably since December of last year, I've been playing Frontier Online, and it's really exciting, and I've truly been enjoying watching the format and all of its metagame changes. And yeah, so that's where I'm coming from magically.
Could you quick tell us a little something about the Untapped Frontier League?
Yeah, totally. So I run the Untapped Frontier League, and it's a recent development. So basically, we had this kind of like recurring frustration that I know a lot of other Frontier players have online, where it's just like, like you post a game saying like these require Frontier cards and nobody knows what Frontier is, and so like you end up getting people who are just joining it and thinking they can bring their kitchen table decks, and like, why can't I bring 4 Vault of Whispers to this game? Like, why are you telling me I can't do that? And so, I noticed that there was an opportunity for a league to be had, and Frontier was kind of picking up speed. We had a really strong community with probably 8 or 10 like really frequent players who I found myself enjoying my games with the most, and we were all getting pretty tight. And so I was just like, hey guys, let's formalize this, like we can have Swiss rounds and everything like that. And the Untap Open League started, and then we decided that we wanted to get more involved in Reddit, and that kind of played out like that. And so we've since really upped our presence on Reddit, and we're getting a lot of attention, and now at this point it seems as though the Untap Open League is becoming the premier online league for Frontier, which is really humbling, and it's awesome to have started all of that. And
sorry, on that note, I want to jump in a little bit here and just to say how excited I've been to kind of see this community coming in online together, because playing at Face has been great. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of the competitive hub of Frontier, and kind of seeing that expand to the actual internet, where now, in the past it's been tough to get competitive, high-level games against just well-built decks. It's a lot of, I don't want to say junk decks, but they're not quite as well tuned as what I would be used to at face-to-face games, So being able to jump into this league and play some real kind of high-level games it's been something awesome to do that you just couldn't do in the past online.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree that the Untapped League is made up largely of spikes, and so we very much enjoy tuning our lists and making sure that they're as cutting edge as possible and as fast as possible, and can actually close out games quickly and have win conditions.
That makes sense. All right, so we've got our Frontier Grinder, and we've also got our Online Master. And I'm Kevin Finkle. I'll be acting as the host for this first podcast. I'm just here to ask the tough questions to our Frontier experts, and then keep us on track when they try and talk for just days and days answering them. Personally, I've been playing Magic before I could even read. I had an older brother who played, so I looked at the pretty cards and things. Like a lot of players, I quit around Mirrodin and then came back in Khans of Tarkir. So that's really how I got into Frontier. Is I've been playing just about all the sets that the Frontier sets are legal, and that's where I've really gotten into competitive Magic. You guys ready to begin for our podcast for the day?
Absolutely.
I'm with you.
Alright, so since today's the first show, I thought it would be best to start with a discussion of the Frontier meta, touching upon the best decks of the format right now. We're going to spend a good part of today's show going over deck lists that have already put up competitive results, and we have some lists to look at from two of the biggest places where Frontier is played right now, in Toronto, where Matt's from, and in Japan, where the format started. We think the most important thing for our listeners is to get to know what is successful in Frontier right now. So Matt, Kevin, you guys can leave your fraying sanities and your mechanized production thing, leave them at home for today. We'll get to those in another episode. Without further ado, we're going to kick things off by looking at the results of the largest recent tournament out of Japan, which was the God of Frontier Challenge at Haruya. I think I got that right. Counting down the top 8 here, the tournament was won by Matsuda Yukio's UB Control List. So I've got quite a few deck lists we're going to be going over today. I'll try and run through them quickly, and we won't go into specifics of the lands, the sideboards, except where it's really relevant. The full lists will be available in the podcast notes, and I expect we'll be able to devote an episode to sideboards soon. You can find us at Twitter at MTG Frontier, on Reddit at r/MTG Final Frontier, on Instagram at MTG_Frontier, or on YouTube MTG The Final Frontier. Jumping into this blue-black control list, Kevin, can you take us through this one?
Yeah, totally. So I was taking a look at this list, and it's a really interesting one. Specifically, something that stuck out for me is the use of essence extraction. And I noticed that after this list dropped that the thing to test was where and how many of essence extractions would you run in blue-black control, right? And specifically, someone just spanked me with it today. And I wasn't even running an aggro list, but it seems to fit into this really awesome spot in the meta. I want essence extraction. Basically, like, when I look at where it fits in this list, it speaks a lot to where I would previously run collective brutality. Like, it's a removal spell that gains life, and I'm really blown away by that. Obviously, the top end of this list is really good. You've got a full play set of Torrential Gearhulks.
Sorry, before we jump into the top end, I want to actually talk a bit more about essence extraction, and mostly how much I hate it in the main board. Like, yeah, gaining life is great, but at 3 mana, it's just I have a really hard time running 3 mana blanket kill spells, and this isn't even a blanket kill spell. And kind of its inclusion in this list says to me that it was just an Atarka Red, Mono White Humans, Jeskai Flyers meta. I don't think this list has juice versus, let's say, Abzan aggro. I just don't see enough ways.
It definitely isn't taking out rhinos.
Yeah, I don't see enough ways to deal with rhinos or an Afenza, a Dramoka's Command on any of your, 3 toughness creatures is going to be a little tougher. It does have Grasp of Darkness, but I don't see enough unconditional removal that I want essence extraction mainboard, especially not when I'm sideboarding Kalitas. I feel like Kalitas is definitely mainboard material in a meta where you want to run essence extraction mainboard,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that, and I don't know if you've been following the Haruya events as much as I have, but I've noticed a general kind of drop in popularity of Abzan. It seems like they're going for like fast is good so far. So like a lot of the previous like Haruya tournaments that had like 50 plus players, it was like 3 or 4 Tarka Red lists in Top Cut, and so I think that as far as essence extraction goes, like that was definitely a meta call. I don't know how that sits with you.
And I agree, absolutely, it was a meta call. I'm just saying that I think in a more developed metagame, there's a little more. You have to slow down a little and be a little more efficient with your mana. That was my main point. Anyway, I'm happy to continue on to the top end of this deck, which has a pretty spicy piece.
Yeah, I fell in love with this right away because like this card is the reason that I like fell in love with the format. Basically, like a full playset of Torrential Gearhulk. Holy cow! Like 4 Torrential Gearhulk, 4 Dig Through Time. This guy is like all in on the blue in this deck, and it's amazing. I'm like truly blown away by it. Plus, like he can get an early Torrential Gearhulk out of like his graveyard with Liliana the Last Hope. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think personally I'd be off for Torrential Gearhulk. It feels, and especially the Silent Guard, the Drifting Death, like it just feels like so much top end for a meta where you're preparing so much for a Tarka Red. You know, I feel like a lot of those slots could have just been Kalitas and lowered the curve a little bit, because there are a lot of games as a control list where you just don't get the opportunity to hit 6 mana, you know? Like, once you hit 6 mana as a control list, I kind of feel like you're going to win, whether you're slamming Gearhulks or Silent Guard the Drifting Death or just Kalitas followed by a removal spell, you know? Because Atarka Red and these aggro decks just don't have the gas to keep going. If you stop them, and you win.
Yeah, I agree that like a well-timed removal spell is just like murder for a lot of Atarka Red lists. Oftentimes against a control list like this, they'll board in, Outpost Siege, so that they can start using the obligatory draw effects of like exile this card. Chandra's a really popular one as well right now for like, you know, obligatory draw where it says exile this card and you can cast it. I think we will get to some of the more well-adapted lists of like control versus aggro a little later in our discussion of this top cut. But yeah, like I'm definitely like I've had a really, really hard time recently running a full play set of Torrential Gearhulk. Like I've just steadily, like as the format has gone on, had to trim how many Gearhulks I'm running.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think another thing is, for me, just hard casting Silent Guard the Drifting Death is just such a scary thing to do. You're using 6 mana at sorcery speed. That just seems like suicide to me. As much as it is a pretty cool card when it swings and kills all their minions, I feel like for 6 mana, there's better ways to kill all of their tokens.
I mean, for less mana than that, there's great ways to kill all their tokens.
Yeah, exactly.
For 1 less mana, you can kill everything. So, like, for 1 less mana, you can cast Crux of Fate and destroy all non-dragon creatures. So, like, yeah.
Absolutely. And looking at this list, I think, in fact, the biggest thing that stands out to me in this list is blue-black versus Grixis. I think the opportunity cost of going Grixis here is really low. It even has 4 Bloodstained Mire already, so we can easily splash a couple red lands with like almost no opportunity cost. The upside is being able to have K Command, which is a beating versus the aggro decks that like to run, you know, Smuggler's Copter.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's just such a versatile. It's easily one of the top 3 cards in the format. No questions asked.
Yeah, especially in a vehicles format, I'm finding that I'm really, really hot on Colahan's Command right now, just because, like, it's so often, 9 times out of 10, it's a 2-for-1. You know what I mean? And it's got play against control lists, it's got play against aggro lists, it's got play against Marvel, it's got play against Saheeli, so it's like, it's most often just great, you know?
Easily one of the top 3 cards in the format, if not the best card in the format. It's really good. The second thing that opens up, I think, is because we were talking about board wipes, is Hour of Devastation, which I think is a lot better positioned than, for example, Crux of Fate right now. Mostly because it
hits planeswalkers,
which is only really important for Abzan, right? You need to be able to do that 5 damage, kill their rhinos, and kill their Gideons.
And kill Gideon.
Yeah. So that's the big list that it's for, and it also just happens to be good against every other aggro list. You know, it's still just a 5 mana board wipe.
Yeah, I think that right now Hour of Devastation is like properly apprised to like be the board wipe that Frontier needs, whereas like Fumigate and Crux of Fate at that same mana cost have been like trying to hit that and trying to like get people into it and pull people into that color for like a really long time. I think Hour of Devastation just does it. But
I think that largely depends on what kind of deck you're playing. I think for this style of control deck where, you know, they're not playing Jaces, they have 2 Liliana, so it's like that's the only thing it's really going to kill for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to kill Torrential Gearhulk, and it's not going to kill Silumgar. So.
Yeah. Compared with Fumigate for Saheeli, I think is a lot better because it helps to stabilize their life total, giving them more time to kind of dirtle, right? And they have a bunch of Planeswalkers that they don't necessarily want to wrath off the board. So I think Fumigate's definitely the right call there.
All right, so you guys sound a little bit torn on this list. Is this a list that you'd want to play?
No, hard no. And the main reason for that, and to back up, actually, in his meta, it was clearly the right call, right? If you look down this list, it's like 7 aggro lists, and another list that I'm going to trash talk later, so we'll get to that. Spoiler alert, not a well-tuned Saheeli list.
I'm gonna say the same, but yeah, totally. We'll get to that because I mean, both of us are like pretty well acquainted with Saheeli. Personally, I'm a big enthusiast of the deck. Matt's got a bit of a different opinion on where it is, and we'll try to keep our opinions pretty.
Let's call it what it is. Let's call it a hate boner.
All right. Well, we'll get to that in just a moment here. The next list, the number 2 placement by Mitsuyasu Yuki. I'm going to butcher probably all of these Japanese names. This is an Atarka Red list, which is what we were just talking about. A whole bunch of 1-drop creatures, a bunch of prowess creatures, all of those non-creatures, and lots of burn. What can you guys tell me? Is this pretty much the stock Atarka list?
Yeah, this is pretty stock list. I don't really have a lot to say about it because it's just such a normal list. I don't necessarily like... I don't think it's the best Atarka Red list, but there's also nothing wrong with it. And the only reason I say it's not the best is because I think right now I want to be on Matt Mealing's Dark Atarka list, which is a list we're going to get to later in the podcast.
Definitely.
Yeah, the one interesting thing I'm seeing in the sideboard here is the Hostile Desert, which I just think is an interesting include in the sideboard rather than mainboard.
Yeah, it's weird that he put it in. Like, I definitely look at Hostile Desert as... like, I don't know what your position on the card has been so far, but in my opinion, it's the best manland that we have in the format, aside from Smoldering Marsh. Not Smoldering Marsh. What's the black-white one?
Shambling Vent? Yeah, Shambling Vent.
Right. So Shambles is, like, hands down the best manland in the format, but if you're not in colors that can allow that, and you want like that kind of pressure aggressively, then I think that Hostile Desert is the land that you go with.
For anyone
I
wondering,
think it's really good.
Sorry, the Hostile Desert, that's the land out of Hour of Devastation that can turn into a 3/4 creature for the cost of exiling a land from your graveyard.
I do believe it's 2 exile a land from your graveyard.
It is,
yes,
yeah, it's 2 mana.
And it's a 3/4, which is a really respectable butt on a body. Like it's like nice to be able to block, then tap it, activate a thing, and then like take out a creature and have countered a spell or something like that. You know, like it's a really like effective way to run a manland. Like it's a manland that likes to block and can also deal 3 damage.
So I think the major play here is when you're boarding in your Chandras for control or kind of slower grindy matchups, I think you bring in the Hostile Desert just to up your curve or up your land count a little bit to account for the Chandra.
Definitely, and I like that he's running 3 Chandra instead of Outpost Siege. I think that Chandra definitely is way more versatile in what she can accomplish.
Absolutely.
And like is definitely like against control lists. This is what I would want to be running. I also think that it's worth mention. I don't know how you feel about Abbot of Carolkeep in Atarka Red, but personally I've always been kind of lukewarm on Abbot.
I agree.
Full playset of Abbot is kind of bold, and it seems as though, I mean, this player definitely knew what he was doing, but I mean, in Atarka Red, I want to have a really, really heavy concentration of 1-drops, and going. Like it looks as though Mitsuyasu decided to cut a Zergo in order to get up to a full playset of Abbots, and that's definitely like that's not the decision I would have made, but like evidently like it worked. So maybe it's the appropriate meta decision. I don't know.
I don't think Abbot of Carol Keep is necessarily wrong, but I don't think it's your best possible fit. You know, like it's not bad. It's a solidly not bad Atarka red card. That's kind of all there is to it. I'm never gonna chew you out for having Abbot of Carol Keep, but it's probably not your like number one power pick.
Yeah, definitely not. It's nice when like you want to be able to like have, how do I put this? Card selection. Like, do I want to play a land this turn? Okay, I just exiled a land. Cool, I can play that. Like, the fact that Abbott says you can play the card as opposed to casting the card is definitely an advantage.
Definitely. Anyway, I don't have anything really more to say about this. It's just a standard Atarka red list. If you're playing the format, you kind of know how Atarka red works. It goes really fast and you die. So...
The one other thing I do want to say about it before we move on is that it speaks to the Atarka red that is going wide rather than the Atarka red that is going tall, and the fact that that this gentleman decided to run one Become Immense as opposed to like a playset or anything like that, like that is that's something that's worth mentioning, and you know, like it's something that'll come up with the rest of these Atarka red list, I'm sure.
Yeah, back in the day, before Aether Revolt launched, we saw a lot more of the Go Tall lists. But the reality is, Fatal Push just makes it a lot riskier on the Go Tall list. You know, even with the, I can't remember the name of the card, but it's +2/+2 hexproof.
Blossoming Defense.
Blossoming Defense, thank you. Even with that card as backup, you just don't always have it, and you don't always have the mana. And with the Go Tall list, you kind of want to just combo out as fast as you can. So I think the inclusion of Fatal Push really kind of pushed that style of Atarka red out in favor of the Go Wide.
Definitely.
One more question about this deck. Would you say that this is probably the fastest aggro deck in the format right now?
The Archetype Atarka red, absolutely. There's no deck that will kill you faster.
Hands down.
And actually, no, I gotta wait to tell that story because we haven't got to Mealing's list yet.
All right.
But yeah, definitely, it's the fastest kills in the format. It's not always like the most. How do I say this? It's not necessarily the most well-rounded aggro deck, and it certainly has some bad matchups. But if you're just gonna want to,
its Saheeli matchup is so amazing. Like,
yeah.
Oh my god, get off Saheeli if you're in an Atarka red meta.
I think there are options as Saheeli into Atarka red, but we'll get to that.
I'm going to move on to the third place list here, which was in Soul Aggro, just in blue-red by Ishigami Raito. So this deck, it's just in blue-red. It's taking kind of all the good cards from Kaladesh, the artifact cards from M15, a little bit of Origins thrown in there, and he's running a bunch of cheap creatures with Ornithopter, Bomat Courier, Hangerback Walker, Thopter Engineer, and then he's sticking in Soul Artifact on there. He's also got Smuggler's Copter, he's got Ghostfire Blade. What do you guys kind of think about this deck and this archetype?
Cool. I always, like, when I looked at the way that Aether Revolt was going, I took a look at Metallic Rebuke, and I was like, this is the deck. Like, in Soul Aggro is the deck that wants Metallic Rebuke. You know what I mean? Like, it's just running, like, a bunch of artifacts that it wants to turn into creatures that are 5/5 indestructible that can kill you. And so, like, having, like, flexibility on what those artifacts can do is huge. So being able to turn them on with Improvise is really, really cool. And I really like the fact that Metallic Rebuke was an include. The interaction of Smuggler's Copter and Soul Artifact is really cool. And, like, honestly, like, it looks like this was, and I don't know what your take on it is, Matt, but it looks like this is like a post Pro Tour Hour of Devastation in Soul list. Like, it really speaks to, like, this is what Ramunap Red informed the aggro list to be able to do, you know?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I kind of got to say, overall, I don't think in Soul aggro is a good archetype to be on. I think it's maybe tier 2 or tier 3. There's just so many things that can go wrong for Soul aggro when you're kind of setting up 2-for-1s for your opponent, or even worse, if they happen to be playing, Kolaghan's Command, one of the best cards in the format. It has the speed where, yes, it can go very fast and do some unfair things, and it steals some wins. But at the end of the day, I don't see it being a tier 1 deck. So that kind of colors my ability to look at this list and say good, bad, whatever. It's just not something that I've seen see a lot of success at face. So that's kind of where my opinion of it comes from.
As someone who's like often mainboarding Dromoka's Command, it really surprises me that this lost to, or that this won over the Bant Human deck, which had 4 Dromoka's Command in the 75, because I have been really, 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 really hot on Dromoka's Command since the format launched, and it's just against the enchantment based decks. Dromoka's has always felt unfair.
I'll have to look out for Dromoka's Command and other ways for them to kill these artifacts and the rest of these lists here. But we're going to move on to list number 4 here, which is a Jeskai deck. Kind of a Jeskai Flyers, Jeskai Burn, run by Mikami Oshiro. He's running just a bunch of 1-drops. He's got the Disruptive 3-drops in Reflector Mage, Spell Queller. He's got Mantis Rider as a beater. All red removal with Fiery Impulse, Abrade, Lightning Strike. What do you guys think of this kind of list?
So the first thing that actually stands out to me about this list is the 3 mainboard Soulfire Grandmaster, and that in my meta that would be a lot, right? Only because it doesn't do necessarily what an aggro list wants. It's not bad. It's a 2/2 bear with lifelink. Has a really strong ability in the late game, but the reality is that Jeskai Flyers just doesn't want to get to late game. They want to kill you way before that. Obviously, for this particular metagame, it's very Atarka Red, Jeskai Flyers heavy. It's all aggro. So it's the right choice here. I just think outside of Japan, where we're not seeing quite so much of a heavy aggro skew, it's probably a softer spot on the deck.
So I'm gonna speak to the use of Soulfire Grandmaster because I'm very much opposed to your opinion on that. And the reason that I'm at that spot is because specifically a list with 3 Soulfire Grandmaster main board just made it into top cut in our Untap Open League. And NASCAR Father, one of our users, is really, really masterful with it, and I've just been watching it and been absolutely blown away by it. And I know, he's using a Dark Jeskai control list. However, the things that it synergizes with is a really long list, and it's not just its late game rebound ability. It really is all right, if we're gonna race, let me show you how I'm gonna win that race. I'm going to put a 2-drop down on the board, and I'm going to kill your guy, and then I'm going to gain 2 life. It really... I was lukewarm on it at the beginning of our season, and now I'm just, blown away by what it can accomplish. It's a target for so many... it's a possible target for so many of the, recursion spells that exist that say, this, you can get a creature back or a permanent back with 2 CMC or less. That can get Soulfire Grandmaster back, and that's amazing. The lifelink on a stick is really cool. Being able to, get a new dimension out of your burn spells is really cool. I'm really, really hot on using Soulfire Grandmaster, and honestly, talking about, a deck that top ends on turn 3, having something really, really good to do on turn 2 is awesome. So, and that's not necessarily always going to be cracking a clue.
I guess the back end of that argument for me is if I want to race, I'd much rather have Seeker of the Way, and I'd rather be able to lower my land count. Because you see, this particular list is at 23 lands, and it tops out at what? 3 mana? That seems... So that seems like a lot of lands for a deck that tops out at 3 mana. I'd much rather have a play set of Seeker of the Way, which you add prowess to the lifelink ability instead of the kind of late game value recursion, and then you just have more pure gas in your deck.
That makes some sense.
If there was 4 Soulfire Grandmaster, I'd totally agree with you. I think that the debate right now in our league is, do you run 2 or do you run 3, assuming that you're running Soulfire Grandmaster. So
All right, so our experts are a little bit torn on Soulfire Grandmaster, so that's something we'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think? Are you pro Soulfire Grandmaster, against it? But either way, I'm going to look real quick here at number 5 list. We've got a Tarka Red, another deck. This one run by Fukugawa Takayui in 5th place. I'm going to kind of speed through the rest of the top 8 here. Nothing too much about this Tarka Red list. The only real change, he's got one less Wild Slash, one more of Reckless Bushwhacker. You guys think there's anything perfect to talk about there?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd want to speak to is the one of Reckless Bushwhacker. It kind of speaks to like the first aggro list that came out, which was like goblins in this format, and like debatably that was like a very, very one-dimensional list. I like that that Fukugawa did not go over the top on committing to Reckless Bushwhackers, but like having an awesome additional way to finish out the game is really, really
That's
cool.
definitely true. I think Reckless Bushwhacker is where I would want to be with some of those Abbots of Carol Keep we wanted to replace earlier. But it's a small change.
It's a very minute change, and the fact that he's only running one of it speaks to how important it was.
All right, well then I'll jump to the number 6 list, which was a Human Bant Company list run by Jeremy Desani. Somehow that one's actually still hard to pronounce, even though that's a English name here. So this is a collected company list. We've got a lot of low-cost creatures, ability to grab them with collected company. If you play Standard, Modern, pretty much anything, you know how that works. He's running Thraben Inspector, Glorybound Initiate, Lambhole Pacifist, Reflector Mage, Renegade Rallier, and Thalia's Lieutenant, who just puts all these counters on all of them.
So I just actually want to jump in there. When I first saw this list, I wasn't super hot on it. But apparently MTG Goldfish what's the word here? Apparently the Glorybound Initiates in this list are actually Athalia's Lieutenant, which makes a lot more sense to me.
The original
It's
list
the
had
initiates
Thalia Heretic Cathar listed as a 4 of. Those were actually supposed to be Thalia's Lieutenant, I believe.
Oh wait, so there's no Thalia Heretic Cathar in here in this list?
There is no Thalia Heretic Cathar in this list.
There's the one in the
holy
sideboard.
moly.
So there's, yeah, it's really interesting. So when one of my fellow league mates and I already talked about him, NASCAR. Anyone who's been following the Untap Open League is probably pretty familiar with NASCAR Father. Anyway, when we took a look at like this list the first time, it was just like 4 Thalia Heretic Cathar seems like a lot, right? Like 4 of a legendary creature in the first place is usually a bad idea. Like even like Anafenza in the Abs and aggro lists is like really, really risky to run as a 4 of, because like if you draw 2 in your opening hand, you're just like, hey, I guess I'll just wait to cast this. And like, so we tested it with the 4 Thalia Heretic Cathar, and what was really, really interesting was like, all right, we know that this is a human list, it has to have like Thalia's Lieutenant, but like having a lot of Thalias in the main board felt so right against Saheeli specifically. Like it felt really, really good to have a lot of them.
I actually agree.
Saheeli. So
I think 3 is the right number though.
like yeah, 3 is absolutely the right number, but like it's kind of like this happy accident where it's like prior to this, I would not have considered running that many Thalias in the main board, and it's like I was looking at it and I was like, well, when you're right, you know, like this guy wanted to run 4 Thalia, and it's just like, all right, so I'll try it, and it worked really well. So like we ended up changing like the balance of like 2 drops to accommodate.
Yeah, I think I'd like a few more Jace as well, and maybe 1 less Glorybound Initiate. Otherwise, it's kind of a standard list. No real surprises.
Yeah, definitely not. It's just straight up human synergy.
This is a real deck in the format. This isn't like some rogue thing that they're trying out here for trying to do the human synergy. This is like a real competitive deck in Frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the thing that like changed this deck the most in recent like sets coming out was the inclusion of Renegade Rallier, and it's like absolutely just something that, oh man, the ways that Renegade Rallier and Tireless Tracker and like Thraben Inspector all like interact with each other are just mesmerizing. Like
Yeah,
Truly
I agree.
awesome.
I think it's probably high tier 2 right now. I've seen it pushed out of the meta a little bit by Abzan Aggro and Saheeli at face. In particular, the list's running a lot of tireless trackers, as I found they just haven't had the time to get their tireless trackers rolling, and they get kind of outvalued by those two lists.
I mean, it's hard to beat the Saheeli list on value, and we'll probably talk about that a little later. But.
Yeah, I've got one more, and then we'll go to a Saheeli list. So list number 7, 7th place in this tournament, was Tsuchiya Mihoko. He was running a mono red, so not a Tarka red, but mono red. Pretty much the same 1-drops. He's got a few cards kind of that we'd normally see in the side deck. In the main deck, he's got Hazaret as well as Chandra. What is he kind of gaining by dropping the green from this deck and going for mono red instead?
Well, he gets to run Collective Defiance. And I think that it kind of hones in on... Okay, so you see the Hazarets, you see the Reckless Bushwhackers in the creature base. And I think that this kind of speaks to the old... Like, the early Frontier, like... metagame where running a goblins list was like really hot at the time, and kind of like is a callback to that while also shouting out to Ramunap Red in standard with the Hazarets. I don't know what your take is.
So I think the biggest takeaway I have from this is the land base, which again is basically Ramunap Red from standard. I think the truth is, like, you can kind of just play any red deck wins and they kind of all do the same thing. I think the best version is again, Matt Mealing's Dark Atarka, which has a little bit of black and a little bit of green in it. But I think that the differences between the red deck win decks are really kind of small, and they all kind of do the same thing. So I'm not really seeing anything surprising here. I think it's probably a top tier deck. It's not very different from Atarka.
All right. Well, finally, we've been trying to talk about it. Last place in the tournament, in 8th place, we had a Saheeli combo deck by Nishihara Hiroki. So, Saheeli Rai, Felidar Guardian, that makes the cat combo. This one, it's got a bunch of one-of. I see one Tireless Tracker, one Whirler Virtuoso, an Arborback Stomper, a Glory Bringer, a Chandra, an Eldritch Evolution, a Manglehorn, all in the main deck here. And then some of the value creatures we normally see. Reflector Mage, Rogue Refiner, Elvish Mystic, which is a change, Smuggler's Copter, Harnessed Lightning, Oath of Nissa, and Elder Deep Fiend. So it's kind of all over the place, but it's still Saheeli
It's
combo.
so all over the place.
I'm not going to lie here or sugarcoat this. This is a bad Saheeli deck, which is a testament to the power of Saheeli combo in this format, that it was able to top what was this, a 60-person event?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. It was, I think it was, I read like 86 or 76 or something like that in, it was something like 86.
Truth be told, I don't know that I'm actually running for Rogue Refiner in my optimized Saheeli list. I don't think I would. I'm just saying, like, I think Saheeli really wants to lean on Fumigate and just wrath you off the board over and over again. The thing I see about this list is it's very all in on Saheeli combo, so if they have a way to just stop it, if they just Authority of the Consoles, I think you just lose. Like, you don't have the raw grind that a lot of other Saheeli lists have. Because, like, other Saheeli lists, they basically use the pressure of the combo to build board state while you have to hold up a response or lose the game.
Right, exactly. I think that that's definitely like the thing that like sets the deck ahead, is that now, as opposed to like the early metagame where like everyone was kind of figuring out like, how do we make this combo work? Like, now it's like, all right, the way that you do it is you have a really oppressive, not necessarily oppressive, but like a fair game that you're playing throughout, where it's like, all right, I'm gonna ramp and also build board presence and like go throughout this whole thing and like set up my mana base so that I have all of my colors, which is like really greedy. It's like a 4-color deck all of the time, and like throughout this whole process, like there's the incumbent threat, like the incipient threat of like, if you don't leave mana up and I get to 7 mana or 6 mana, like, I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah. And again, the big thing I see here is just that this deck just hard loses the second you have like a stop on Saheeli combo. Trespasser's Curse, Authority of the Consoles. They don't have a lot of removal. So if you just land a Thalia or an Archangel of Tithes, whatever, I don't see a way for this deck to win.
Yep.
I do want to point out the 2 Elder Deep Fiend as just like a really stylish way to force the combo. Where you just, it's super fun. I love it as a concept. I don't think this list is good. It almost doesn't matter because it's not. The rest of the list is kind of whatever,
I think that this was probably and I really don't want to sound degrading to this player, but if I was to hand a deck to someone coming into the format who had recently been disenfranchised from Standard, I would be here, try Saheeli combo.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
All right, so that's it for our Haruya top 8. Now it's on to what everybody's been waiting for. We have some never-before-released results from last month's Toronto North America Frontier Championships. We here on Final Frontier are very pleased to be the first to release what should be a great look into the competitive Frontier meta. And once again, we're going to have full deck lists, sideboards. They'll be available on our Twitter, on Reddit at r/MTG Final Frontier. So I'm going to jump into this top 8 list. In first place, finishing the list, we had Abzan Vehicles, piloted by Matthew Hoffman. So this list, it's Abzan aggro, but it's got an artifact theme and a very low curve. There's 4 of the Toolcraft Exemplar, 2 Thraben Inspector, Warden of the First Tree, and it's got all artifacts to curve out onto with Exemplar. So it's got Smuggler's Copter, it's got a Heart of Kirin, Walking Ballista, Hangerback Walker, and then rounding out the threats, they've got Thalia, they've got Anafenza the Foremost, and just 2 Siege Rhino, and then Planeswalkers in Gideon and a Sorin Solemn Visitor. So for removal from the deck, they're using Fatal Push, Dromoka's Command, and an Abzan Charm, and then they've got 23 lands, including Spire of Industry. Now I want to go into your opinions, but the first thing I want to ask, you've been talking about how Toronto is probably the most competitive place that Frontier is being played right now, and this was the biggest tournament there recently, and here's the first place list. So is this the best deck in Frontier right now, or was this kind of just the best deck for this meta, or do you think you just kind of got lucky, hit the right matchups? What do you guys think here?
I think that's a hard question. This is definitely a tier 1 deck. No doubt about it. Saying it's the best deck or calling it out as the number 1 deck, I think is a bit presumptuous. And I think it's also worth noting that because it took place on the weekend of GP Toronto, we actually lost quite a few of our regular Frontier guys to the main event at GP Toronto. So it's possible the competition was maybe a little less stiff than was typical. But I don't want to shit on this list. I think it's definitely a great list. And I think we've waited a long time for a vehicles list to kind of materialize, right? And I think basically what it boils down to is when vehicles was in Standard, the best removal was in Mardu. In Frontier, the best removal is in Abzan. It's Fatal Push, it's Dromoka's Command, it's Abzan Charm, and it's Murderous Cut.
The fact that Abzan Charm is a removal spell that also doubles as a draw spell is just so impressive, and then sometimes you just incidentally end up putting counters on stuff. You want to talk about a format-defining card. Abzan Charm is so good, and I was really, really blown away when I saw this list. I don't know. I'm with Matt on this. It's so fresh that I can't say whether or not this is the best deck in the metagame. However, I'm really, really excited to try it. I've been really holding back on trying it just because I don't want to spoil any of these lists. I haven't wanted to spoil any of these lists for a lot of the players on Untap who are part of the league, and they would get super, super curious because Vehicles is so hot in the league right now, and seeing an Abzan Vehicles list would be major, major boner for a lot of players. Specifically, I'm talking about Musi. Specifically, I'm talking about Glasses, who are both in Top Cut right now with Vehicles lists for our season. And this has me really excited. The density of 1-drops is just super impressive, and I've been talking about a vehicles list lately that would feature Warden of the First Tree just because it gives you so much flexibility on what you can do with your mana. And I like this list a lot. I think that it speaks a lot to the multiple angles that you can take on an aggressive strategy. And having trimmed down on siege rhinos seems to have been really
And one thing I kind of want to call out here too, as kind of like a general meta shift that we've seen in Toronto, is, and you see it a lot in this list, is the tendency to go leaner and leaner on your decks. So it's almost more of a modern deck building style where, the mana has to count. You can't be dirtling and, running 4 siege rhinos and curving them into goblin dark dwellers. And it's just, if you're playing 5 drops, you have to have a damn good reason. Even playing more than a couple 4 drops, it's just the tendency to go leaner and leaner, just like modern lists.
That makes some sense.
Way to call out my list, man.
So there's no wingmate rocks in here for a reason. So,
yeah, exactly.
What do you think? This list against the winning Haruya list, would you put your money on between those two?
This list, 9 times out of 10.
Absolutely this list. Yes, definitely.
All right, well, I'm going to go on to the second place list, which was Abzan Aggro, piloted by Lucas Morel. This is another flavor of Abzan Aggro, getting rid of the artifact theme, but they've got Elvish Mystic as a way to speed up the deck, which you were just talking about. It's all about being fast out of the gate here. So they've got 4 Mystic, 4 Warden. Their 2s are Scrap Heap Scrounger, Grim Flayer, Smuggler's Copter, and he has a few more 3 drops with Thalia and Anafenza, and then a full Forged Siege Rhino. Deck rounded out with 2 Gideon, 3 Dromoka's Command, 3 Abzan Charm, and a couple Collective Brutality. It's a little bit of a different take, but the 2 decks have a lot in common. What are kind of the pros and cons between the 2 of them?
So this is your standard Abzan aggro list. Like, it's almost card for card exactly what Abzan aggro does. It's just kind of the most value creatures and the most value removal. You could maybe splash remove, or maybe change up the removal suite a little bit. Fatal Push is fine. A Murderous Cut would work. But there's nothing too surprising. Overall, I do think 4 Gideon Ally of Zendikar is the right call. It's that good a card. It goes in every strategy, and it's good against every deck.
Yeah, I really like the heavier use of Abzan Charm here, and I agree that that Fatal Push probably has a spot in this deck, but I understand going with higher creature density instead, and going with a removal spell in Dromoka's Command that speaks to that high creature density.
All I mean when I say Fatal Push, I think we cut down one of the Abzan Charm and maybe one of the Dromoka's Command. I think Fatal Push is just better positioned against Atarka Red, Mono White, and even Black-Green Scales, which have been big at face. I don't think this is wrong, though. Like, I'm not trying to trash on the deck. I just think at the end of the day, the removal suite's kind of whatever. Like, the difference is small.
Right. Like, at the end of the day, you want to be slamming rhinos. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's not about the removal. It's about the creatures, for sure.
All right. I'm going to move on to our list that I know that we've had someone waiting for. This is Dark Atarka, piloted by Matt Mealing. Came in 3rd place for the list. So this is Atarka
Red. This is the one.
Do you just want to take it away?
Sorry, I cut you off there. I thought you were done. Do you want to start that again?
Oh, no, that's fine. So it's an Atarka Red list, but this time it's got this tiny little black splash, kind of just, this drop of black. It's going up to 14 1-drops, adding Lightning Berserker and Foundry Street Denizen to its rank. That's the goblin that gets a +1/+0 every time another red creature comes into play. And it looks like it further lowered its curve by cutting the Hordling Outburst, cutting the Stoke of the Flames, and even Lightning Strike. It's only got Wild Slashes, Atarka's Command, Dragon Fodder, and a copy of Shock. Plus, Driven to Despair, a card from Hour of Devastation.
This is so hot. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this is the version of Atarka Red I've been waiting to talk about all night, and I definitely think it's the premier Atarka list right now.
Having the ability to just pretend to be a control list and have 4 card draw cards in the main board that encourage you to be aggressive at the same time, and then can be recurred to just dump your opponent's hand at a later stage in the game is just so incredible.
And one of the great things about Driven to Despair here is he has so many prowess creatures, and it's a double trigger. So that's +2/+2 to all of his prowess creatures. It's a lot of damage that adds up. I think, yeah, and it gives them menace too, which helps go around, for example, Abzan aggro creatures, right? So if they're going to wall off with, if they board in Kalidas or just have a Rhino on board, if they have things to block with, the menace is actually very relevant. The big thing about Driven to Despair in this list is that because Atarka Red does so much damage, it's almost like a combo kill when you cast Driven to Despair, because you just get them to discard their hand, and if they're discarding their hand, there's no coming back when you're at like 4 life because it's turn 4 and your opponent's playing Atarka Red.
So if we're splashing black already in this deck, are there any other black cards you'd want to try out in Dark Atarka?
No, it's just a very light splash. What else in black would you really be looking for? Like Fatal Push isn't really what you want. Your goal with Atarka Red is just to kill them, stay focused, just kill them. None of this control crap.
I think maybe you could make a case for Kolaghan's Command, but yeah, I'm mainly with that. I think that the light black splash for Driven to Despair is probably the right call.
I don't think Kolaghan's Command deals enough damage. I think it's too much mana. And while it is crazy high value, the reality is you're not going to outvalue people on Atarka Red. You're going to kill them fast or you're going to lose. So no matter how much value you're packing with cards like Kolaghan's Command, the value part isn't what's going to win you the game.
All right, well, that's looked like a great top 3 so far. Our number 4 list was Grixis and Soul. So this is another Ensoul artifact deck, but it's a little bit different from what we saw in Japan. It's got that black splash. They're playing Bomat Courier, Hangerback Walker, Scrap Heap Scrounger, Thopter Engineer, Pia and Kirin Alar, and then 2 of Maverick Thopterus. That's the 2/2 with Improvise for 1 blue, 1 red, and 3, which makes 2 Thopters when he comes in.
Thanks for reminding me what that does, because I definitely forgot.
Yes. For non-creatures, he's got 4 Implement of Combustion, 2 Aethersphere Harvester, 4 Shrapnel Blast, 3 Unlicensed Disintegration, which is what that black splash is there for, and a couple Metallic Rebuke, plus, of course, the 4 Ensoul and 1 of Tezzeret's Touch. But this list has no Ornithopter, no Smuggler's Copter, no Ghostfire Blade, and no Lightning Strike. You guys tell me what's going on here? These are some very different choices.
Again, I'm not the master of Ensoul myself, so I'm maybe not the most well equipped to handle that question. I do really like the Implement of Combustion. I think it's creative, and I love the way it pairs with Shrapnel Blast.
So that's that 1 mana artifact, and you can sacrifice it for a red to deal 1 damage to a creature. Or to a player, I'm sorry.
I think it's 2 damage to a player, is it not?
Are we talking about Shrapnel Blast?
We're talking about the
Implement of Combustion. So...
Oh, yeah, that's that card that I used in Draft in Kaladesh.
Yeah,
it's when it enters the graveyard, it deals 2 damage to target player, I believe.
No, sorry. So you sacrifice it for 1 red, it deals 1 damage to just a player, but when it leaves the play, you draw a card from it.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's different than I thought it was. I'm glad you corrected me.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cantrip,
So really what I see that there. What I also see it there is an answer to Saheeli.
Yeah, so I can see how that would combo with Shrapnel Blast as well. Just because, being able to, forcefully sacrifice it, deal 5 damage, and does it also deal damage when it leaves the battlefield, or does it just draw the card when it leaves the battlefield?
It just draws the card.
Yeah, I still think that's really cool. Personally, I'm a big fan of turning instants and sorceries into cantrips. I think it's a great way for aggro decks to get more value out of their decks, and I see how that would be appealing to a deck like this. It looks laughable at first. Something I also want to bring to attention is the full playset of Hangerback Walkers. A lot of Ensoul players kind of juggle how many Hangerback Walkers they want to be running, how many combo pieces that actually turn on artifacts they want to be running, and I think that Hangerback Walker is right where the deck wants to be, just because it both goes tall and goes wide and combos with everything that wants something to be an artifact and continues to get counters on top of that. It's exactly what the deck wants.
So another reason here for the black is actually the playset of Scrap Heap Scrounger, which is something I really like in Ensoul. Because one of my problems with Ensoul is there's just so many ways it can go wrong for you. All removal is basically a 2-for-1 against you, right? Because you're getting your Ensoul artifact killed. and whatever creature or card you put it on.
Assuming it's not a Darksteel Citadel that got sold.
Sure, but there are things that can go wrong with that too, right? Reflector Mage is a beating. There's even Dramoka's command. There's a lot of ways things can go wrong, and while the best case scenario definitely is ensoling Darksteel Citadel, it's by no means a foolproof plan. And there are a lot of games where you don't see your Darksteel.
Yeah, definitely. The fact that it's only like a 4 of, I think that this deck did a much better job of, like, I think that Dylan's deck does a much better job of responding to the possible things that can go wrong with Insult.
I agree, and a large part of that's Scrap Heap Scrounger, just because it's such a pain to get rid of.
Totally.
Yeah. The only other thing I see with this deck is I think I would have liked some Walking Ballistas. Primarily to be able to deal with the Saheeli combo a little better.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
All right, so that wraps up our top four decks. All aggressive. I can kind of see what you mean about the Toronto format being so fast. The rest of the top 8 here are 3 more aggro lists: Jeskai Flyers, Jeskai Burn, and Atarka Red, and then another version of the Saheeli combo. So let me quickly go over those lists. That 5th place list, that 7th place list, the Jeskai Flyers by Griffin Russell and the Jeskai Burn by Ashen Mills Emmett. I'm going to kind of lump those together here. They're a little bit different, but they're both, Mantis Rider decks. The first one's traditional Jeskai Flyers. It's got Mausoleum Wanderer, it's got Selfless Spirit, Copter, Mantis Rider, Spell Queller, pretty much all his 4 ofs. He cut it down with some removal. He just has Stoke, Lightning Strike as a 1 of, and Jeskai Charm as a 1 of. So the second list moves away from the creatures somewhat for 4 Soulscar Mage, 3 of those Soulfire Grandmaster again we were talking about, a couple Reflector Mage, a couple Copter, and then the Mantis Riders. They bring in much more burn and card draw with Lightning Strike, Fiery Temper, Lightning Axe, a Braid, Sweltering Suns in the main deck, Cathartic Reunion, 3 Treasure Crews, and finally 4 Fevered Visions in the main deck. We've seen a few similar decks like this already, but what are Griffin and Asha doing differently?
So before we get to what they're doing differently, I think I kind of want to call out that we haven't seen a lot of Jeskai Flyers making top 8s in Toronto, and I think the primary reason is Andrew Oyen. And I know that sounds silly, but he plays Black-Green Scales, and Black-Green Scales just really kills this deck. The ability to just Walking Ballista and shoot down all their little X1s, it's backbreaking. The deck can almost just not handle Walking Ballista at all, even outside of a Scales deck. But when you put it into a Scales deck and it's just a huge Walking Ballista that doesn't die when it kills things, it really is backbreaking for the archetype Jeskai Flyers. And it's a big part of the reason we haven't seen it until now in Toronto, really, which is because I believe Andrew Oyen was playing another event at GP Toronto.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, you've gone into a lot of length when you and I have talked offline about like how important a good Scales list is to the metagame, and in Untap we don't really have very many like active Scales players right now, and so like I've just been kind of picking your brain on that because I don't really have an experience to speak to like how important Scales is to the metagame. For those of you who are unaware with what we're talking about right now, it's a 1-drop called Hardened Scales. Whenever a creature would receive a +1/+1 counter, it gets an additional +1/+1 counter. So it synergizes really well with things like Walking Ballista. It gets doubled up by the
Green-Black Snake.
The Green-Black Snake Winding Constrictor. And so it's like much more explosive, and there's Avatar of the Resolute as well, which is like this super incredible 1-drop that comes in just gigantically in a lot of cases where like you'll have like Hangerback Walkers and Walking Ballistas out, and then you'll play for 2 mana like an 8/7. It's just really, really impressive. I don't know if Avatar of the Resolute is really popular in those lists, but it was definitely like...
It is, but with the release of Driven to Despair, I'm finding it the easiest slot to cut. So usually I end up with some number of Driven to Despair and some number of Avatar, but not the full play set at this point.
Cool. I'm glad to hear that card's still doing really well in that. So yeah, I would say, like, as far as these Jeskai Flyers lists go, the one that placed better, I find really interesting. The one that Griffin played with 4 Stoke the Flames. I think that that's a really, really awesome, like, combination with Mantis Rider, just because you have all these vigilance creatures that you can leave up after combat, and then being able to just, like, with 2 mana just deal 4 additional damage is super impressive.
And to kind of switch gears into the Asher Mills Emmett list, this is a 7th place list. He's running 4 mainboard Fevered Visions, which, firstly, is awesome. Fevered Visions is a super underrated card. But secondly, it's a super dangerous thing to do into a meta full of Atarka Red. Granted, we didn't have a lot of Atarka Red at that particular tournament. I don't think we had a couple lists, but nothing like we saw in the Japanese lists. But definitely a risky thing to do into aggro lists.
Didn't Jeskai Visions do really well in a previous 1K as well? I think it was the May 1K.
It did,
that you guys
but
did.
it was more of a straight kind of burn list than it was a... I don't think it was very similar to this list, but I'd have to double back and check it, to be honest with you.
I know that the thing that, like, set it over the top was the use of Soulfire Grandmaster.
Yeah.
As someone who, like, gave the deck a couple spins, it was just like, wow. If you got Soulfire Grandmaster and some of these other cards, it was just like, all right, I'm going to discard my whole deck, use a bunch of madness, and then, like, draw it all back with Treasure Cruisers.
I definitely do like Soulfire Grandmaster in a Visions list, specifically backed up by Burn, because in a Visions list, you really do need to you can just have a bunch of Burn and just point it straight at their face. When you're not in a Visions list, your Burn is a little more... what's the word for it? You have to be a little more careful with it, because if they turn around and drop a Kalitas on you, you're done. You're just done.
Yeah, totally.
Versus in a Visions list, you can refuel, right? So that's the big difference, I think, for being able to run Soulfire Grandmaster and have it good here, whereas I didn't like it in the Japanese list.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see where you're going with that.
Okay, guys, I'm going to move on. We have one more Tarka list in the top 8. This is a more traditional approach. It's similar to what we saw out of Haruya. I'm going to kind of skip over that one. That was our 6th place finisher. And then in 8th place, we've got another Jeskai version of the Saheeli combo, piloted by Trevor accordingly. So this is a strictly 3-color version. It's diving in on value creatures. Besides 4 of the namesake combo, it's got 4 each of Thraben Inspector, Spell Queller, Reflector Mage, Knight of the White Orchid, the 2/2 first strike, who gets you a plains if your opponent has more lands than you. He also has 3 each of Whirler Virtuoso and Aether Theorist, which is that blue energy creature that you use energy to scry. And finally, he's got Eldrazi Displacer and Cloud Blazer, the 5-drop. His only other mainland cards are 3 Stasis Snare.
Yeah.
So, I want to ask you guys questions about this list, actually. What common sideboard card does this list automatically lose to?
I would probably say Hushwing.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Yeah, everything's an enter the battlefield trigger, and it's just really, really unfortunate.
And to deal with those Hushwing Gryphs, it only has 3 Stasis Snare in the whole. That's the only way to deal with it in the whole deck that isn't an enter the battlefield effect. I mean, it is, but It's not a creature, so it's not affected by Hushwing.
Yeah, so with the way that Eldrazi Displacer works, it's not a blink effect. It's a flicker effect. So you can't just, like, throw their Hushwing Gryph up in the air, then do your thing, then come back down at a later time, right? Like,
and again, this is another testament to just how powerful Saheeli combo is, where you have suboptimal Saheeli lists making top 8. And I think also a good... I don't actually know. Did the Abzan lists here run Hushwing Gryph on the sideboard? They must have, right? Let me
taking a look here. I mean, Hushwing Gryph's so good. I imagine I'm not seeing
not in the first,
one in the winning list.
Not in the winning list. We had 3 in the second place list.
Okay, yeah.
But I was gonna say that's probably why we saw the dominance of Abzan so much, but maybe not, given the first list didn't have Hushwing Griffs in it.
So there may have been a lack of just the Saheeli combo.
Yeah, but the first list had like a lot of really, really good removal.
It's true, yeah. And vehicles, which tend to be harder.
And like was so aggressive.
Yeah, and it had vehicles which tend to be harder for things like Reflector Mage to hit, which is probably relevant.
Definitely, and the fact that like the Saheeli list on Top Cut isn't running a lot of the outvaluing cards. Like there's no ralliers in this list and things of that nature that you would get from green. Means that it can get burned out a little bit more quickly. Granted, like Cloud Blazer does provide like card draw, and Aether Theorist allows you to do selection on your deck with scrying, but I think that if I was on a Jeskai list, I would be scared of getting outvalued with really, really strong aggro creatures and Abzan Charms.
Like, I don't mind this list. I've seen it play. I saw the guy play it, and when they don't have things like Hushwing Griff, it's scary because like you just Eldrazi Displacer for just so much value, right? Especially once you get that Cloud Blazer going and you just bounce it over and over again, and every time you bounce it, it's 2 cards and 2 life. That's huge. That is a massive Eldrazi Displacer bounce. But again, the reality is Hushwing Griff is a super common sideboard card, in particular in Abzan lists, which are a format staple of T1. It has Abzan aggro has no bad matchups, so it's just to play this list and expect not to run into Abzan aggro just seems like a real long shot to me.
Yeah, it seems like a fool's errand. I agree. But it's really impressive how far the list got, and like that that the player decided to run a vanilla Jeskai list, which sounds really like weird to call like a 3-color list vanilla, but like I think that when you're going with no green or no black, like you're really just leaning so hard on the combo and really, really hard on value creatures and Flame Tongue Kavus.
Flame Tongue Kavu?
Yeah, Flame Tongue Kavu is how I refer to any creature that hasn't entered the battlefield.
Okay.
I can't remember what set it was from, but it's a 4-drop that deals 3 damage.
Yeah, I remember the 4-drop. I didn't connect that it was just enter the battlefield for you.
You'll hear me say that a lot more often now.
All right, now we're all on the same page, so it's okay.
All right, so the last thing I wanted to wrap up our show list with is I want to talk just a little bit about Exelon spoilers. We'll probably end up devoting a whole episode to this, but I want to be able to. Everyone's excited about these new changes that might hit on Frontier. So we've all heard about the leaks. That was a while ago. Now we've got some actual spoilers coming out. So I want the one thing I really want to come and talk about was this new Jace card, Jace Planeswalker card. Jace the Cunning Castaway for 1 and 2 blue. It's a legendary Planeswalker Jace. Do you guys want to talk about what that means?
This is a really interesting card to me, mostly because when I take a look at it, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with it. I don't know, like, what your guys' takes on it are, but, like, having to have creatures on board is really strange for a Planeswalker, I think, especially since, like, it's a Planeswalker that wants you to be doing combat, doesn't have any way of, like, boosting power or toughness, so it doesn't like encourage combat other than like, hey, it turns your attacks into Smuggler's Copter effects. So
this is the worst Planeswalker in Frontier. It's terrible. The problem is the ceiling on it is just so low. It doesn't really do anything unique or abusable. There's just no real upside, Looting is all right, but it's not really what I want out of a 3-mana Planeswalker. There's so many ways to loot in this format.
There really are.
And especially having it, not only is it your way to loot, but it's conditional. And when you fulfill that condition, it means you don't have a blocker back to defend this Jace.
So Jace didn't impress you too much, but can you talk about his type line? He is a legendary Planeswalker Jace. Can you talk about what that means for Frontier, the change in the Planeswalker uniqueness rule?
So I definitely... Sorry, you go ahead, man.
You know what? You go first. Mine's a little bit more of a bomb.
So I think that, like, the fact that they chose Jace to demonstrate, like specifically this card to demonstrate, like, hey, this is how planeswalkers are going to work now is perfect, right? Like the ultimate demonstrates, like, hey, now you can have two planeswalkers that aren't legendary and they can be the same, and there's no planeswalker uniqueness rule, and this is the card that like very much breaks that and says like, you know, this is how the game's going to work now, right? And like for those purposes, I see like why they chose to do it this way. I think that there are some planeswalkers in this format that very much more like want that rule to be in effect. I know Matt's like itching to talk about Gideon right now, so I'm just gonna let him go.
So the thing about talking about Gideon right now is I'm actually going to be talking about Saheeli. And the biggest thing about this is that I think, especially, let me say, I love this change philosophically, but I think specifically to the Frontier format, it's problematic. And the main reason for that is that Saheeli is already bordering on too good. And in my opinion, I know not everyone shares that
loves
opinion.
Planeswalkers.
Yes. Specifically, Saheeli wants to play Planeswalkers and force you to overextend into Fumigate. I don't know if you guys have played against Gideon, but I can't think of a better Planeswalker setup than curving 3-mana Gideon into Daddy Gideon for forcing you to overextend into a Fumigate. It's just, I think that's going to be the way of Saheeli in the future, and I think it's going to push Saheeli into tier 0.
Yeah, I think that you might be right. Like, I definitely see like Gideon's edging out a lot of the other planeswalkers that we've seen. We've seen Chandra trying to kind of vie for that spot as like planeswalker buddy. We've seen Nissa doing really well, specifically the 5-mana Nissa. And I think that kind of keeps a slot, but I think that Gideon's probably going to edge out Nahiri and Chandra and be the planeswalker that Saheeli has always wanted to hang out.
Yeah, I think it's just the reality of dropping 3-mana Gideon on 3, 4-mana Gideon on 4, and basically just saying, come at me, but also don't tap out, because if you do, you lose. It's basically, you can't really beat those cards, especially pairing the two of them together without tapping out. It's just, you're not going to do it. And if you do tap out, Saheeli can just combo you. And
yeah, like...
Not just that, but even if... Sorry, go ahead.
Having Gideon in the sideboard plan for Saheeli already felt really, really strong. Having multiple Gideons seems...
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing about it is it allows the deck to just play a fair game if it wants to, right? Because the reality of just having as many Fumigates and ways to recur Fumigate as they do, it basically just means it's a matter of time before you get Fumigated off the board. And having 2 Gideons on the field when that happens, it means they're going to hit you for 9 every turn. And you can't really stop it, because Planeswalkers are really hard to interact with unless you have creatures. And you don't have any creatures because Saheeli's going to Fumigate you over and over and over.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this more in our set review of Ixalan, but for now, I think it's probably time to put the subject to bed.
Yeah, and I think it's time for us to go to bed as well. I'm going to bring us to the end of our show here. I want to thank you guys once again. This has been a really awesome show, and we're just running out of time here. This was just our first episode, but we're going to be back with more content soon, so we can spend as much time as possible talking about Frontier. One last time, I want to shout out about the Toronto Showdown. Possibly just a couple days after we air this, it should be going on. So the Sunday, I believe that is the 10th. So we want to just keep talking about Frontier as much as possible, and that's why we'll be back to you soon. So a big thank you to any listeners out there and to my 2 experts, Matt and Kevin. I look forward to maybe hosting you 2 again soon for some more great Frontier discussion, including Ixalan spoilers, some scary brews, sideboarding strategies, the online Frontier leagues, up-to-date tournament results, and more. Let us know your thoughts and comments on the show, plus any lists or cards that you'd like us to cover. For everyone out there, we look forward to being your go-to source for Frontier format information online. Your final frontier. And signing off. Experts, you want to say goodbye as well?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I would also like to mention that our signups for the Untapped Open League Season 2 will be available in the show notes. That's coming up on September 10th, and we'd love to see more participation in that. It's an open league, and there's no entry fee required, and we'd love to see more faces there.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's been great, and I hope to see as many of you as possible at Faces Showdown on September 10th. Have a great one.